Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be unpacking a report, and I got to say, it reads like a real-life thriller. It's about what it's like to be a dissenter in modern-day Russia. Our guide for this is Maksim Kharitonov. He's an expert witness, and he specializes in Russia and the post-Soviet countries.
Okay.
He put this report together for a UK law firm that's working on an asylum case. And one of the things that struck me is Kharitonov background. He's got a degree in international law, he's active in human rights conferences, and he actually runs a YouTube channel called The Human Rights.
Wow.
Pretty impressive.
Like, yeah. That's quite a resume.
It is. So this isn't just some dry legal document.
Right.
This is a first-hand account of what people are up against when they dare to disagree with the Russian government, especially since the war in Ukraine started.
It's important to remember that this report was prepared for a specific legal case, but I think what it offers is some really powerful insights into the broader political climate in Russia.
Yeah. Kharitonov paints a pretty stark picture of life under Putin's regime. Increasingly authoritarian, cracking down on free speech, controlling the media. But what really stood out to me were the specific laws that he details. These laws basically criminalize any criticism of the special military operation in Ukraine.
And even actions many would consider quite innocuous. Under these laws, discrediting the armed forces or spreading false information can land you in some serious trouble.
Yeah.
What's striking is how broadly these laws can be applied, essentially criminalizing any form of anti-war sentiment.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about protests or public statements. Even liking the wrong post on social media can get you slapped with a hefty fine.
That's what's so chilling about it. It's this constant fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. And Kharitonov gives some truly disturbing examples.
Yeah.
Private conversations being reported to the authorities leading to charges. I mean, imagine living in a society where you can't even trust your neighbors.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond individual actions. Kharitonov highlights how the Russian state targets entire families to intimidate dissenters, parents, siblings, children. They're all vulnerable.
Wow.
This is about creating a chilling effect, silencing any form of opposition.
It's not just about staying silent, though. Kharitonov also dives into the risks associated with supporting Ukraine in any way.
Right. The report makes it clear that any form of support for Ukraine, financial, humanitarian, even vocal, is considered an act of betrayal by the Russian government. We're talking about potential charges of treason, which carry sentences of up to 20 years. Donating to a Ukrainian charity, attending a pro-Ukraine rally, these actions could have devastating consequences.
It's like they're drawing a line in the sand. You're either with us or against us. And Kharitonov points out that even leaving Russia doesn't guarantee your safety. Criticizing the war from abroad can still land you in trouble if you ever return.
Exactly. The reach of the Russian security services, particularly the FSB, extends far beyond the country's borders.
So we've got this crackdown on dissent, this intense pressure against anyone who supports Ukraine. But it gets even scarier when we talk about conscription.
Right. One of the most alarming things Kharitonov details is how Russia's need for soldiers in Ukraine has impacted their conscription practices. We're seeing people who were previously exempt for medical reasons being called up to serve.
Imagine being drafted into a war you fundamentally oppose, even if you're physically unfit.
And refusing to serve. That's a serious crime in Russia with the potential for imprisonment. It puts people in an impossible position, choose between your conscience and your freedom.
To bring this all to life, Kharitonov focuses on the case of an individual seeking asylum in the UK who we'll call Mr. to protect his identity.
Right.
Mr's story is a powerful example of the very real dangers Kharitonov outlines in his report. He was an outspoken critic of Putin's government for years and faced constant harassment as a result. He was forced to change cars to avoid being recognized and targeted. And things escalated dramatically after the war began. Police and FSB agents began visiting his parents' house, asking questions, a clear attempt to intimidate him through his family.
It's a chilling reminder that dissent in Russia comes at a steep personal cost. It forces people to make agonizing choices. Some choose to remain silent and hope for the best. Others, like Mr. Atanas, are forced to flee their homeland in search of safety.
We just heard about the very real risks people face for dissenting in Russia. Now you might be thinking, couldn't someone like Mr. Atanas just relocate within Russia? Lay low somewhere else.
Kharitonov addresses that directly. He argues that internal relocation offers very little protection for dissenters.
Why is that? I would think just getting out of Moscow would make a difference.
Well, the reality is that Russia's security services have a nationwide reach, and relocating might actually make you more of a target. It raises suspicions. Beyond the surveillance, there's a social and economic pressure. Dissenters often face job discrimination, difficulty finding housing, and ostracism no matter where they go.
So even if you manage to escape the direct reach of the authorities, you're still potentially branded a traitor.
Precisely. And that brings us to a particularly disturbing trend Kharitonov highlights: the increasing hostility towards Russians who return after seeking asylum abroad.
Especially those who spoke out against the regime while they were away, I imagine.
Exactly. The message from the government is clear. There's no coming back once you've crossed that line.
What kind of consequences are we talking about here?
It runs the gamut: criminal charges, surveillance, professional blacklisting, social isolation. They make it incredibly difficult to reintegrate into society.
It's heartbreaking. Imagine being punished for seeking safety and freedom.
It underscores the very real dilemmas faced by those seeking asylum. And Kharitonov doesn't just focus on the external pressures, he also examines the psychological impact of living under such constant threat.
That's an aspect I hadn't really considered. How does that factor into things?
Well, Kharitonov explains how fear and trauma can significantly affect a person's memory and the consistency of their statements.
So an asylum seeker might provide slightly different details about an event each time they recount it.
Yes. And this can be misconstrued as dishonesty or a fabricated story. But Kharitonov argues that it's often the opposite. The inconsistencies stem from the trauma itself.
That makes sense. Trauma can lead to fragmented memories, right? You might remember certain vivid details while others are blurred or missing.
Exactly. And there's also the element of avoidance. Asylum seekers might subconsciously avoid talking about the most painful aspects of their experience, leading to gaps in their narratives.
So how does this affect their asylum claims?
Kharitonov makes a crucial point. Minor inconsistencies in a person's story shouldn't be automatically interpreted as a lack of credibility. These inconsistencies can actually be indicators of genuine trauma and distress.
I imagine that's a difficult argument to make in a legal setting where they're looking for hard evidence.
It is, but it's a critical point that needs to be considered, especially in cases involving political persecution where physical evidence might be scarce.
So connecting this back to Mr.'s case, he's seeking asylum based on a series of threats, harassment, even a car chase. But let's say he can't provide photographic evidence of every single incident.
Or his accounts of certain events have minor variations. Does that automatically invalidate his claim?
That's where understanding the psychological impact of trauma becomes so important, right?
Absolutely. Kharitonov argues that those factors need to be taken into account when assessing the credibility of an asylum seeker's story. It's not just about the facts, it's about understanding the human experience behind those facts.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal and political aspects of this situation, but it's important to remember the human cost.
Yeah.
Real people are living through this nightmare every day.
Precisely. And that brings us to perhaps the most crucial question Kharitonov raises: is there any hope for change in Russia?
That's the question that lingers in my mind after reading this report.
It's a heavy question and one that doesn't have an easy answer, but I think Kharitonov provides some valuable insights based on his expertise.
What kind of insights? I'm eager to hear what he has to say.
He acknowledges the immense challenges facing those who dare to challenge the status quo in Russia. The government's crackdown on dissent has been relentless, and the space for free speech is rapidly shrinking.
So where does he see any potential for change?
He points to the resilience and courage of individuals like Mr. People willing to risk everything for their beliefs, and he emphasizes the critical role of international pressure.
Right, holding Russia accountable for its human rights violations.
Exactly, and not just through words, but through concrete actions like sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and support for Russian civil society organizations. He argues that while change from within the current regime seems unlikely, external pressure can make a difference.
So it's about creating space for dissent, emboldening those fighting for change within Russia.
That's the hope, at least. It's a long and difficult road. But Kharitonov's report, while highlighting the grim realities, doesn't completely shut the door on the possibility of a better future.
It can feel kind of overwhelming, when we look at the situation in Russia.
Yeah, I understand. The crackdown on dissent, the risks for asylum seekers, the pervasive surveillance, it's heavy stuff.
It really makes you wonder, what can be done?
I think Kharitonov hits on something really important, though, when he talks about the power of information. The more we understand about what's actually happening, the better equipped we are to support those who are, fighting for change.
So knowledge is power, even in a situation that feels this bleak.
Exactly. Kharitonov's report, it arms us with facts, with insights, with real human stories. We can use this knowledge to make, informed decisions and take meaningful action. Even seemingly small actions can have an impact. Think about Kharitonov's YouTube channel, The Human Rights. He's using that platform to shed light on these issues and to amplify the voices of those who are often silenced.
It's a good reminder that even in a tightly controlled information environment, the truth can still find a way to break through.
Precisely. And that's where we come in. We can share that information. We can talk about these issues with our friends and family. We can contact our elected officials. All of that contributes to raising awareness and to keeping the pressure on feeling.
So it's not just about being informed ourselves. It's about spreading that knowledge and using it to advocate for change.
Absolutely. Kharitonov's report doesn't offer easy answers, but it does provide a roadmap of sorts. He points to the role of the international community in holding Russia accountable for its human rights violations.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, think sanctions, diplomatic pressure support for Russian civil society organizations. All of these tools can be used to create space for dissent and embolden those fighting for change within Russia.
So it's about applying pressure from the outside while amplifying the voices of those on the inside who are working towards a more democratic and open society.
Exactly. It's a long game, a complex game, but I think Kharitonov's report, even with its sobering assessment, offers a glimmer of hope. Change is possible, but it requires sustained effort and a multifaceted approach.
It's a call to action, then, for all of us. We can't turn away from what's happening. We have a responsibility to stay informed, to speak out, and to support those who are risking everything for a better future.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Maksim Kharitonov's report.
And thank you, listener, for diving deep with us. We encourage you to explore Kharitonov's work further and to consider what role you can play in supporting human rights and freedom of expression, not just in Russia, but around the world.